Hello everyone. Today I have a story about the time I lived in California and when I was working at the Michael's art store. It was quite a walk to get to work. It took me at least an hour to get there, mostly because of all the hills. It was about 3 miles to walk there, and I remember every morning, right before I would get there, there was a small gas station close to it, about 200 yards away. I would always go in there, and I would look at the different types of coffees they had. The coffee that I decided to get was the Jamaican coffee. It had a strong flavor, but wasn't too strong or overwhelming. I drank some of my coffee and I stood outside. I showed up a few minutes early because I didn't want to be late. It was my first day at this job, and I wanted to make a decent impression. So I stood there and was thinking about my life and where I was going and the choices I was making. I looked around and there was a bit of fog outside, and the cool fog kept it from being too warm. It was late September, and I had gotten used to Ohio's colder weather, and I noticed that the other people were huddled up in their cars wearing jackets. The temperature outside was a bit cooler for that day. It was in the mid-60s, but for me, that felt like nice weather, because when you live in Ohio, anything above 32 degrees is warm. So I headed over to work, and I was waiting outside. A few other workers showed up. The sun still hadn't completely rised yet. We waited a few more minutes, and then the manager showed up to let us in. The manager told us what to do and gave us some suggestions and tips. We were handed walkies with small earpieces so we could talk to each other. We were allowed to listen to music in the morning as long as our headphones were out when we opened at 9 a.m. I headed over to the art section where all the pens were and the paints, and the manager told me that I would be in charge of this location. So I took a look around and looked at all the pens. I was fascinated by how many was there. It gave me so many ideas for things that I could draw. And because of doing this, it gave me insights to the different type of pens, and I ended up learning a lot about the different pens that were there. I'd always look at them and study them and think to myself what a drawing would look like with them. But I was always frugal and never liked spending a lot of money on things that I didn't absolutely need. I went to the next aisle. This aisle had all the paints. There must have been hundreds, maybe even thousands of different colors. I was in charge of organizing them and looking at all the numbers to make sure they matched. When I first started doing it, I tried to match them just by looking at the colors, but it was really difficult to do so. For example, the green paints. There had to have been hundreds of them. So I ended up having to just look at the numbers and go by that to figure out where to put them. A few hours had passed by now after working. It was 9 a.m. Customers entered the store, and after only 15 minutes, they started asking a lot of questions, such as what items are on sale, if this is clearance, how much is this product, are you getting this in, or the location of a product, or if we have any backstock. It was my first day, so I wasn't sure about most of these things that they were asking me, so I asked my manager, but I also tried my best to figure it out myself. Later on during the day, I met one of the other co-workers, and we started talking about StarCraft 1 and 2. We were talking about the differences between StarCraft 1 and what's changed. He was into computers and electronics, and so was I. He asked me what hobbies I have, and I told him one of my hobbies was drawing. He asked me what I like to draw, and I told him portraits and abstract. And then I was telling him about all the pens that are there and how I feel like buying all of them if I had the money. It was now time for break. I headed over to the local gas station close to the store, and I looked around, but they didn't have much of anything that interested me. I always tried to eat healthy, and most of it was snack foods. and I already had a coffee, so I ended up just getting myself a bottle of water. I drank it, then headed back to work. I clocked in, and then started filling more of the paints and organizing the pens. As I was filling the pens, I noticed there was these kind called the Pigma Microns. I had never used them before. I'd always used graphite, ballpoint, or gel pens. I was looking at them and they come in assorted colors, different tip sizes. I was curious to try them and they were on clearance. I bought a pack of them. They were only $5. I was looking around at the different sketchbooks they had, thinking of what type of paper I would need for these. I seen that they had very fine tips, and the one that I was going to draw with, the .005, the .1, and the .2, were very small tips, so I figured it'd be best to get a smooth paper. I ended up buying a Strathmore sketchbook that had very smooth paper. I headed to the register, paid for the pens, and then headed home. It was quite a long walk home up all the hills, but it gave me time to think about life. As I was walking up one of the steep hills and got to the top, I looked over and I saw this big valley, and the trees all over, and the landscape. It was a beautiful sight to see, and that morning there was fog that had been out, and what was left of it was disappearing. Now that the sun was peeking above the clouds and the top of the trees in the distance, it was starting to get a bit humid outside. I continued walking home, and when I got home I took my sketchbook and my pen, and I sat down at the table and thought of what to draw. I wasn't sure what to draw really, because I'd never used these pens before. For the first page, I started scribbling some lines, doing cross-hatching and stippling, to see how the pen worked. There wasn't no feathering or no bleed-through in the paper. The paper I got was pretty thick, so I didn't have to worry about that. After I'd spent about half an hour practicing with the pen and learning the different tip sizes and how they worked as well, I went ahead and I started on the second page, and I started doodling some other random shapes and faces and portraits and abstract designs. I had been drawing now for several hours, and I wanted to get out of the house for a little bit, so I headed to the local bus stop and got a bus ticket. I took the bus to a local grocery store. I headed in, spent some time walking around, looking at some things, and mostly just thinking about my move there. I had just recently moved here. It was a big change from living in Ohio, getting used to the weather, the different people, and a different atmosphere, different opportunities, and a different life. I kept looking around and looking at the different foods and the different prices. By now, I was getting really hungry. So I got some food, and then headed over to a local art store. It was only about 100 yards away from the grocery store. I was looking around, and I was thinking about the microns I got. I wanted to do a larger drawing, but they would just take so long. I looked around at the different markers they had. They had Sharpies, Copic, and some off-brands on clearance, because I wanted to start a big drawing, and at the time I didn't have a lot of money. So I got the off-brand that was on clearance. They were double-sided brush markers. One side had a fine tip for drawing smaller lines. The other end had a brush tip for having lines that varied from wide to narrow. By now it was getting really late. The sun was setting down, so I decided to head home. I continued walking up all the hills, and I thought about getting the bus, but I just kept walking. I enjoyed watching the sunset and feeling the cool air blow against me. There was a cool breeze, and it cooled down a lot at this point, and it was no longer humid. I watched the sunset off in the distance in the valley. The skies were changing different colors, and I watched as the light reflected across the trees. When I got home, I made some food, spent a few minutes to relax and just look out the window as the sun set. And I thought about what to draw, and how to use the brush markers, and how to incorporate them with the micron pens. While I was at the art store, I had picked up a big sheet of paper. It was like a big poster board for art projects. I took that, I laid on the table. I grabbed some of my brush markers and micron pens and started doodling. I just thought of whatever came to my mind. In the abstract shapes, animals. I even started drawing a dragon and included scorpions and different insects and animals that were all in abstract forms and shapes and twirling around each other with fractal designs. I would use the microns to draw the outlines and the intricate details for this drawing. And later on, I would go in and use the brush marker to fill in larger areas that needed more detail. I continued drawing for several more hours. I looked at the clock, and it was already past midnight. I had to be up for work at 4 in the morning, so I put my brush markers and microns away. I took a step back and looked at my drawing. I was happy with the progress I had made at this point, but I was really tired at this point, so I went ahead and put my pens and markers away and went to bed, excited for a new day and a new drawing.